Niaz Ahmed came into bat at number 10 against England in 1969. And it was his second match at that point, but his first at home. And him just coming out to bat got an absolutely huge ovation from the home fans, far more than any of the other star batters who had come out before him. This was the guy everyone was cheering on. And despite being a number 10, he also made some runs, all 16 not out of them. And all of them were cheered by the crowd like they were something incredibly special. And he actually ended up helping Pakistan wag their tail to get to 246. Later, he would be given the new ball as well, and he would take the wicket of the legendary bowler John Snow, while Basil D'Oliveira made 100 at the other end. But it was clear that every time he touched the ball or he did anything at all, the crowd absolutely loved Niaz Ahmed. And that is because it was specifically his crowd. This game was for Pakistan, but it was being played in East Pakistan. Or I suppose, as we now all know it, Bangladesh. And Niaz Ahmed was the first player who was born and raised in East Pakistan to play Test cricket. And if this all sounds like a great story, well, it kind of isn't. Because the reason that Niaz was playing at all was because he was a token. These games were being played in East Pakistan, and the idea that there was a player on the verge of selection was a pretty big deal. And so Niaz Ahmed actually spent most of his time as 12th man, despite the fact that no one in Pakistan really thought he was good enough to get into the side. And so instead of actually trying to help cricket in East Pakistan, they just put a token in. And to be honest, as I said, it wasn't like he played that much either. But 2 years after Niaz Ahmed's final test match, which was that game, Bangladesh would become an independent nation. And so their wait for their next test player would actually be 31 years. And so why am I telling you all this? Well, I think it's really important to note that this week, Bangladesh didn't just go and beat a random team at home. They went and beat the team that they were once part of, that they once had 12th men and occasional test players for. And they didn't just beat Pakistan, they beat Pakistan in Pakistan 2-0. If you love cricket on a deep spiritual level and want to be involved when no matches are being played, we have the game for you. Hit Wicket is so good that Harsha Bogle and me have backed it. And that's a lot of nerd energy behind one game. This is a strategic game of cricket, and it's not just about whacking your screen really, really hard with your finger. This isn't a game where you swipe all around to try and hit the ball. You work out what works best based on real-life cricket situations. For instance, dot balls bring pressure, ones and twos lead to fours. There is no way you can just hit a six every ball or take wickets all the time. This is proper cricket, yet it still has some special gaming powers in there as well. And so this game is about playing, but also building and managing your team. You are the batter, bowler, owner, coach, captain. It's your dream, right? And there are no ads, it's just cricket. Download Hit Wicket now and bring out the cricket legend in you, because Hit Wicket is a cricket game made for you and supported by other cricket nerds. Stick it in your pocket today. This was made using MV Players Insights. The same technology that supports the England and New Zealand test players is available to club cricketers as well. So years ago when I had my blog, I used to call the Bangladesh team the Toygas. And it was partly because I really like the word Toygas. I think it's an excellent word, and whoever came up with it, bravo to them. Because also in 2006, 2007, when the blog was sort of starting, you would watch Bangladesh play and you'd be like, okay, they have some young players here, but they don't look like full international players. And for a long time, they sort of got stuck in that rut. I've talked about before that they essentially did the weirdest thing in cricket. They started Test cricket, and then they played it for a few years. Then they got rid of everyone with experience and went with this Toyga side, who then had to learn Test cricket again. And of course, in their history, they have had some little moments of success. I think the first time that they really got something massive was maybe the quarterfinals of 2015 World Cup when they went up against India. But even if you go to Test matches, of course, we have seen them beat Australia and England at home. In fact, they're a really decent side at home. I think most people would accept that. But as far as their biggest win goes in Test cricket, you would probably have to say that was beating New Zealand. I think we now know that was New Zealand on the downward slope and at the end of their reign. But regardless of that, to go to New Zealand and win that test when other much better teams were struggling in New Zealand, I think was a hell of an effort. And one of the reasons I think this was so brilliant is their away record. This is incredible. I had to write this down because otherwise it sounds a little bit made up. Bangladesh had played 65 matches away from home before touring Pakistan. They had 6 wins, 55 losses, and only 4 draws. Your mind's going to be drawn, pardon the pun, to the losses. But I think the draws is maybe the more interesting thing there, right? You know, Bangladesh couldn't even stay in matches long enough to make sure that they didn't lose them. Now, part of this was the era that they played a lot of test matches in, but they also played a lot of test matches on very, very flat surfaces that the other team had no problems making lots of runs in. And the other interesting stat is that of those 65 matches, almost half of them, they lost by an innings. So Bangladesh would travel somewhere, bat twice, and watch the other team bat once, and then head home. That is, when you look at away records of early teams, up there with like New Zealand and South Africa, who also incredibly struggled when they began Test cricket. The difference was social media didn't exist, and also when New Zealand would play back in those days, there weren't actually that many games, so they would lose, then there'd be a few months or maybe even a year before you had to think about them again. Bangladesh have been losing over and over again, even if some of the bigger sides, specifically Australia, don't actually want to play them at all. But when going through this entire away run, it's worth having a look at those 6 wins as well. So they have beaten Zimbabwe twice in Zimbabwe, which I think is still a good effort. I think beating Zimbabwe over there, where they're a pretty decent side themselves, is fair enough. Maybe if Bangladesh had played them more, they would have got more wins over there, but they've got the 2 wins there. They've also beaten Sri Lanka. That's probably the conditions that are the most similar to theirs. I would say that Sri Lankan wickets are a little bit more similar to Bangladesh wickets than perhaps Indian wickets are, although maybe it's the UAE, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Either way, beating Sri Lanka is another good step. Then you can see that they beat the West Indies, and you can see here, they actually beat the West Indies twice. The minute I saw this, something in my head went, wait a minute, I know this series. There's something about this series that doesn't make sense. And of course, if you go back through these scorecards, what you will see straight away is that the West Indies players were on strike at that stage. It was an incredibly depleted West Indies side that went up. There were some good players though. Kemo Roach and Darren Sammy were playing there. But overall, it was a bunch of cricketers you have never heard of before losing to a team that usually doesn't win away from home. So all things considered, really just the New Zealand and the Sri Lanka matches are the only ones that have been incredibly important. So yes, they've won at home at times and they've beaten some good teams. But when it comes to traveling away, they really do have these 2 different series here that are interesting. So the first question has to be, well, how did they win, right? Like, how did they beat Pakistan here? Well, they did it with 2 really, really fascinating innings. They only had 2 players score more than 200 runs in this series. Now, it was only a 2-test series, and I think their batters only batted 3 times. But essentially, they did win this with 2 innings, if we're being honest, from a batting perspective anyway. Mushfiq's innings in the first test match was just monumental, and it's a real shame he didn't go on to make the double 100. And that was the innings that kept them in that match for long enough to eventually get on top. In fact, I think when he was out, they already had a lead by that stage, and I don't think Pakistan was assuming any of that was going to happen. And then in the second test, probably an even more remarkable innings, even if it's a lower score, was Lytton Das and his 138. They were going to be bowled out for like 40 at one stage, if you looked at that scorecard. Like, it was absolutely ridiculous, and Lytton Das brought that back and got them into a great position. And what I like about this is you've got one of the older guard here stepping up, and you've also got the guy that we've all been waiting to sort of finally break through and play in innings like this. No one doubts that Lytton Das can do this, it's just whether he can do it regularly. But he did it in this series. And if, in a 2-test series, if you get 2 innings with the impact of this, the score here and what the actual match situation was here, you're in a really good position to at least win 1 test and perhaps, in this case, win both. I think the more important player though for me is Mahidi Hassan. I've been fascinated with him almost since he came on the scene. Like, he was a really, really good bowler, and then occasionally you'd see him score runs. And he's still probably not quite an all-rounder, but he's like close enough on that verge of all-rounder that it's really important. And he took wickets and made runs in this series. He was probably their 3rd best bat, and they didn't get a lot out of quite a few of their other batters. So his ability to chip in and especially stop Pakistan from ever rolling through them was incredibly important. And then of course he can bowl. But I think for Bangladesh, when you actually have him and then you also have Shakib, you suddenly have this incredible situation here where you can build your entire team around these 2 all-rounders. Now, they haven't always had Shakib. Of course, he's got issues at the moment that, you know, we will talk about later. But also he was suspended over fixing as well. But think about this from a cricket perspective. They have one guy who spins the ball one way and they have another guy who spins the ball the other, one guy who can definitely bat in the top 6 and the other one who probably bats at 7 or 8 for them, meaning that they can kind of put together any kind of bowling attack that they want. And I think this is the really interesting thing when you look at Bangladesh in the future. If they could keep Shakib for 2 or 3 years, they can actually put together this fascinating bowling attack. They've got pace bowlers, they've got guys who can bowl right arm, who can bowl left arm, they've obviously got people like the Fizz if he ever comes back, I've got a leg spinner, they've just got so many options, and what this actually allows for is the ability to use all those different options. And so they don't actually need the other 3 bowlers to be stars, but they can have regular 5 bowling options available to them in what is an incredibly versatile attack. I mean, the team that this most reminds me of is probably India at the moment, or England of a few years ago, where you look at their lineup and you go, they can kind of go in any direction they want, which is really handy for different conditions. And specifically when this is good, is when you are traveling. It's when you're going away. But it's also worth saying that while the all-rounders are really handy, they're just a much better seam bowling team than they've ever been before, right? Now, how much is this actually going to stand up when we talk about the World Test Championship? And they're going to have to go to India, which is not particularly an ideal situation to be going through that team at the moment, but they've given themselves a chance and a conversation that they didn't really have at all before. No one expected them to win 2-0. There was always a chance of draws, especially in Pakistan, but Pakistan made the wickets a little bit more fun. So the draws went out. And of course, it was kind of a close series. When it comes down to it, Pakistan had plenty of chances to win all of these tests. But in almost every situation, Bangladesh, who seems to just understand what their team roles are far better than Pakistan do, just got the most out of themselves, and Pakistan completely fell apart. But here's the interesting thing for me. The bowling attacks of the two teams really show the difference between them. Pakistan's bowling average in the last 3 years of Test cricket is like 36.5 or 37 or something. Like 33 would be bad, 34 would be ordinary. Pakistan can't take wickets at all. And you look at this bowling and you go, well, they've got 2 spinners here that are certainly better than anything that Pakistan has, right? Like no one's making the claim that Pakistan has better spin than Bangladesh at the moment. And of course, Pakistan had injuries or also resting people and have lost some form of some key bowlers. But you look at the current crop of Bangladesh seamers, and you might not take it over the Pakistani bowlers, but you can have some conversations about some of them, right? And more importantly, if the Pakistan seamers had access to these two, they'd probably look a lot better as well. But instead, it's Bangladesh. And so, yeah, now they're in with a conversation when it comes to the World Test Championship. I mean, it probably won't be a long conversation, but it's nice to be mentioned. But I actually think for Bangladesh, the 2-0 is far more important. It's not just that they beat Pakistan, right? It is that it was 2-0. It was a scrappy series. The weather obviously played a bit of a part in that as well. The wickets were a little bit interesting. But when it comes down to it, it is very hard to win away without being a little bit scrappy. And the fact that they were scrappy twice and they still managed to get through and win, that's just absolute credit to Bangladesh. But this is how you win away from home. This is how these wins will come. They're not going to get a lot of great, pretty wins away from home. They're going to have to grit and grind for them a little bit. And let's be honest, I've said this before, Bangladesh cricket is set up for grit and grind, unlike almost any other cricket culture I've ever seen. They love that style of cricket. But the Pakistan angle is something I also want to talk about here, because I think there's a really, really interesting thing to be remembered here. I'm going to talk about Ramy Raja. So quite a few years ago, everyone on Bangladesh cricket Twitter kept contacting me and saying, why does Ramy Raja hate Bangladesh cricket? And to me, it was the weirdest thing of all time, because at that stage, Ramy Raja wasn't like an important person. He wasn't running anything. He was a former player and a commentator, but he wasn't someone that I thought that a whole cricket community should take that seriously. So I was like, I'm going to find out what this is. And you start to get into the issues and you understand, of course, a lot more of it is to do with East Pakistan and how some Pakistani people were brought up to think about East Pakistan. And there's no doubt that when I talked to Ramy Raja about that, he said things like, oh, they need to grow up. There was a feeling that Pakistan were the big brother and Bangladesh were the little brother, and Bangladesh just needed to shut up and do something, right? And if that, of course, goes all the way back to the Toigas thing, there's plenty of times when I will write or do anything on Bangladesh cricket, and people generally from other Asian cricket countries go, why are you talking about them? They're absolutely irrelevant, right? So they are still a little bit stuck in the Toiga thing. They still haven't really won all that much, even if you look at this series. But the Ramy Raja thing is, of course, more about culture and identity and who they are and where they come from. And in order for someone like Ramy Raja to ignore the Toigas or the East Pakistan side of things, what do you have to do? You have to build a narrative. And let's look at the last couple of weeks, because this is obviously incredible. What is going on in Bangladesh is that there has been mass floods and there's been, natural disasters and all the things that come from that. And while you're in the middle of dealing with all that, you of course have this coup. As we talked about before, this coup is directly linked to Shakib al-Hassan as well. I mean, when your star player is named in connection with a murder, even if it was a murder that it probably has nothing to do with him and he was out of the country at the time, it does tell you just how much is going on in Bangladesh. So the coup and the natural disasters are all going on at the same time. So you think about this weird triangle, and that's not even going into the BCP, because I suppose that's linked to here too. But you've got a coup, you've got floods, and you've got one of your star players who's been linked to the coup as well. And all of this is happening, and you're going on a tour to East Pakistan. That's a lot for any nation, let alone a cricket nation like Bangladesh. And then you go back and you think about Bangladesh and all the things that I've said before. And so far, the only thing that's ever really been there is the hope, right? Or, the belief, the hope that one day all these people who love cricket this much, who obviously have already produced some very good cricketers, are just going to work it out. And then it's just going to come together. But of all the times you kind of think that disappointment's going to come, it's probably going to be when the country's in all sorts of trouble, right? That's the last time you really expect that the cricketers to come together and actually pull off this. A 2-0 win against Pakistan away from home. There are obviously cricket reasons why Pakistan weren't very good. And there are cricket reasons why Bangladesh were very good, right? But you look at the way that, you look at what cricket means to Bangladesh right at the moment, and you look at everything that's happening in Bangladesh. This could not have happened at a better time. And this is a nation that needed some joy. And of course, they know a lot about joy. They have a whole song about joy. And maybe all this does is give them a little bit of joy at the moment and a lot more hope for more moments like this going into the future. But when everything else is happening to your country at the same time, you take the joy any way you can get it. And if you can get it from 2-0 against Pakistan, you definitely take it.
I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories, like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.